This is the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
Gentlemen, welcome back to the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. I am your host, Ashton Cohen. I'm joined today by Steve Anderson. He is the author of The Bezos Letters. It's a book which encapsulates the principles that I would say define Bezos and Amazon, define the Bezos and Amazon mindset that made the company what it is today. So I was interested in this book because, well, Bezos, like him or not, is one of the most consequential entrepreneurs, people in business, basically in American history, probably in human history. And so I think it's important that we sort of analyze his thinking, what he's about, how he got in this position, how Amazon became what it was. So I think this is a very fascinating sort of topic to look at that. Steve, thanks so much for being with me.
Ashton, it's great to be here with you, and I agree.
Yeah,
I think it's fascinating, obviously enough to write a book about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking quarter century, basically, starting from ground zero into becoming one of the biggest market cap companies in the entire world, creating the wealthiest man in the world, who has tons of influence over major parts of the economy. And so I think it's very useful to be able to sort of look at that and see how it happened and what he's all about, what the company's all about.
Yeah, I think mindset, and again, I agree with you. Whatever you think about Bezos himself, I think you have to agree he's been pretty successful. So are there things that we can learn from that success that you can apply to your own business? And I think, frankly, even potentially other kinds of relationships that you have. So,
no, absolutely. Want to first start off sort of more macro with, and we could sort of take it from there. How did this? So love something that's often forgotten is that Amazon was a .com company in the late 90s and early 2000s. One of many. There was no real indication that Amazon was going to take over the world. It was competing with many other very promising companies. Those companies many of them went away and failed. The vast majority of them did. Amazon went down to, I think, like $6 from its trough.
Yep, exactly.
Stayed in the game and then continued to just innovate and take more and more market share, whereas everyone else, many of their competitors, many of their not only direct competitors, but people in the technology industry that had billions of dollars of capital, failed. So what is it about? What principles, what value systems, what's Bezos's hierarchy of principles and values that contributed to its success and to where it is today? How would you rank the hierarchy of values? You mentioned 14, but what's sort of his starting framework?
Well, I think a couple of things. And so, again, a little background. Actually, Amazon website.com went live in 1995 in July. And then they went public in May, I believe, of 1997. So the first shareholder letter that he wrote was 1997, which came out in April of 98. And he's written a letter every year since, including the 2020 letter, which came out in April of this year, 2021. And I think part of what really fascinated me when I started looking at Amazon, and Ashton, you're exactly right. Part of what I was looking at is coming out of the insurance industry and talking and researching and writing about technology in that industry for a long time. I really started with this idea: is the biggest risk businesses face today actually not taking enough risk? And I would say, from my view, when I read the shareholders' letters, the thing that stood out to me is actually Bezos is very much a risk-taking person. I call him a master of risk because of how he uses it strategically. So what does that mean? Well, for Amazon growing, in fact, my first growth principle is called encourage successful failure. And this mindset that in order to invent, you have to experiment. And by its very nature, an experiment means you're going to fail. So if you're going to invent, and again, his phrase he uses a lot is inventing on behalf of the customer. Mm-hmm. So being willing to experiment, suffer failures, learn from it, and keep going, I think is one kind of core idea. Unfortunately, too many businesses today are afraid of failure or are successful, and that success is actually their biggest risk because it makes them complacent. He was not willing to be complacent. So encouraging successful failure. I think the other thing, and he talks about really both of these in that first letter, is customer obsession. And it's a very interesting phrase because most companies think about a customer journey, customer focus, right? Customer experience. Bezos uses the phrase customer obsession. And the mission is for Amazon to be the most customer-centric company in the world. And so those are a couple things that I think set him apart or make him stand out, is a different mindset. And I think the other thing I would say is he thinks very counterintuitively than most business owners. And lots of examples of that, but he's willing to invest and create new ways of doing things if they serve the customer first. And I think that to me is a key, that risk. One of the phrases he uses for companies that aren't successful is unwarranted risk aversion. Mm-hmm. And that's just the opposite of what he has done and what he thinks.
Yeah, when I was reading your book and sort of doing a deeper dive on some of his more candid interview moments, trying to sort of analyze it from that perspective, because I think with the media, especially when you're the wealthiest man in the world, you're made to fall into a certain mold, right? So some people see him as a supervillain. And Amazon's immense power over the economic and retail landscape, is bound to create problems, right, in society, as anything does. So one of the, as I sort of read about him and sort of look into him, he is one of the most, I would say, well thought out individuals I think anybody's ever seen. It's almost there's a lot of overlap, and I'm a big Musk fan.
Okay.
There seems to be a lot of overlap between those two when you hear them speak. So one of the other things I sort of noticed is obviously Musk is very famous for his risk taking, right? I mean, and of course they're both involved, not coincidentally, in the two most significant civilians in space exploration are Musk and Bezos. What is it about, in terms of his risk analysis and how he goes about risk? Because obviously he's not doing stupid things, even when he does fail. What separates him in that respect in terms of his risk analysis and his ability to, his tolerance for it and his setting himself up for success while taking big risks?
Well, a couple of things. One is, I think strategic risk taking is kind of a key. It's not just, and you mentioned, it's not just throwing something against the wall and hope it works. He actually created processes internally to mitigate and minimize, or what I call protect the downside of whatever they're doing. One of those tools is called a 6-page narrative. So in 2004, Bezos banned PowerPoint and keynote presentations at Amazon. So to present an idea, the team presenting actually had to write out a maximum of a 6-page narrative, starting with a future press release and then going into frequently asked questions. And what he said was that requires people to think deeply before you ever start. So it's not like, let's try this, or, turn it over to the programmers and let's see what comes out. It's very thoughtful review. And again, understanding even with all of that, it may not work. And if you really look at Amazon, they've had lots and lots of failures.
Right.
But part of what he says is all those failures more than pay up for those successes, as he calls them, big bets that we make. And there are a number of them like that came out of failure, but ended up being big bets.
Right. And with the memo thing, that's particularly interesting to me, especially as, a lawyer who would, 90% of the job is writing. And I remember even reading that even at the sort of granular level. So you're sort of chastised if you have bad grammar or bad punctuation and things like that. So really taking your time to detail and write out, because, this is one of the things I realized later on in life as well, is that when you actually take pen to paper, I think that's even more helpful sometimes, or type out your ideas, and then you can challenge them and sort of go to like a very granular level of what you're trying to achieve and what you believe in. The one of the interesting things I saw about him was he mentioned an example of being very adverse to talking about, the stock going up or down. Right.
Right.
And so he takes a view of, well, if you want the stock price to go up, then what has to happen? Then one way to do it is, for in this example he gave, one way to do it would be to save on costs. Well, how do you save on costs? By being more efficient. Well, how do you be more efficient? By making sure there's less sort of deficient packages, because that takes up a huge portion of the pie. Right. And then if you can do that, then you're going to have a more efficient company, which means the stock will go up. So that's kind of like, it reminded me of like the sort of Musk first order principles thinking, where it's like you get down to what are you trying to accomplish? Now get down to the first order of it in order to, and then work your way up from there. Is that sort of his approach with?
Yeah, I think so. And the way I would phrase it at Amazon, and he talks about this when executives, new hires come in from the outside, they're surprised at how little they focus in meetings on financials. Meaning looking at financial statement. Right. He calls those outputs that we don't have much ability to change, but we do have ability to change the inputs. So even like stock price, we can't change the stock price, right, but we can focus on customer growth, customer satisfaction, fast delivery, right? All the customer pillars that they have at Amazon. Those are the inputs. So they focus on inputs, not outputs, which again, so many CEOs today focus on how's the stock price doing this quarter. Well, Amazon, one of the other characteristics and principles is focusing on the long term, on being willing to apply long-term thinking, meaning he almost single-handedly changed how Wall Street looks at quarterly earnings, because he doesn't care about quarterly earnings. He does it because it's legally required. But he'll say, we're not going to make as much a profit this quarter, but 3 years from now, you'll see the impact of what we're working on today. So that long-term thinking, I think, is another key in terms of how Amazon has been able to grow.
I think it's a very important point, because I remember, and they're still on YouTube. You could look back going years and years, even into like the 2010s, where you have sort of people making fun of him and scoffing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you guys haven't created any profit. Are you ever going to create profit? Right. And it was sort of taken as a foregone conclusion that this was never going to be a profitable company, because and there were certain points in history where they were losing a lot of money on paper, and then their losses were expanding, and then he was more confident than ever, and you could see people sort of scoff at that.
Well, even right. The letter he wrote after that $6 stock price, the crash, and the first line of the letter is "ouch." It's been hard this year.
Right.
And then he goes on to say, when I look at our fundamentals, right, looking back at inputs, he says, we're doing really well. And I think early on, he intuitively, or just because he's so smart, understood that the internet in the late 90s was the land rush.
Right.
And that the one who got there and could grab as much territory would be the one long term that would survive and would win. And so it's not that they didn't make profit, but they poured everything back into building infrastructure, building transportation, logistics, better website, more product available for customers to come into. Everything was poured back into the company. And most people didn't understand then.
Right.
Right. And he was willing to keep to what he thought was right and not change it because of that outside pressure.
Right. And forgive me for drawing the Musk analogy. I think that's someone that people understand a bit more because he's so open, right? And Bezos is a bit more reserved, and his, the time he gives to the media is a lot more limited, I would say. But again, it's just the parallels just keep ringing, right? Because here are the two of the most successful, most famous entrepreneurs. And again, it's like with Musk, they would laugh at him for years and years and years,
right,
and say, you're never going to be profitable. You're never going to have, you're never going to meet your shipment guidelines and have X many cars on the road. And he kept missing his own deadlines, but he kept just delivering while everyone was making fun of him for not producing a profit.
Right.
And I think those two really have revolutionized sort of the thinking of being more long-term. The other thing that I admire, and I'm always sort of curious about, and want to see your insight on this. With both of them, they have this uncanny ability to have like a 10-year, 100-year vision that they're executing on. And this is obviously illustrated by both their passions for the space industry as well, while also being maniacally focused on executing present day objectives. So they can have sort of both. That's a very hard balance. And
yes.
What's your sort of insight on that? How does he sort of go about thinking about these things? Like, how does he have a 100-year time horizon and a single day time horizon at the same time?
Well, a couple thoughts come to mind just as examples. One is Bezos is building, and it's almost done, a 10,000 year clock on his ranch in West Texas. Literally a clock designed to run self-sustained for 10,000 years.
Wow.
Now, again, it's some people say it's just somebody with too much money, but for him, it's a reminder. And he partnered, and the names escapes me right now, with someone else as a reminder that we can't just have this short-term thinking. We need to think long-term. Even in his 1997 letter, he has this phrase that when he talks about hiring and people working at Amazon, he says it's hard to work here. We have goals, it's exacting, we want A players. And he says, because we're building something great, something we can tell our grandchildren about. So again, very early on, he's thinking long-term. So I think that's just part of who he is. I think Blue Origin, right, space company, similar mindset there. He's always been a space geek. He did a cameo appearance on Star Trek movie. His grandfather, who he spent the summers with on his ranch in Texas, was head of what we now know as DARPA, Defense.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It wasn't DARPA at that point, but it was the beginning organization for the Defense Department Research and Development company. And so you can only imagine what the conversations were like. The local library in the Texas town had a great collection of science fiction. So he read all of that. So
was it near Houston or something? Is that why?
No, it's West Texas. It's in the middle of nowhere, Texas. So, again, that always infused with him. His high school valedictorian speech in Miami, Florida, was about how we need to create the mechanisms to move manufacturing into space so that the Earth could become a national park and we'd come and visit here. So again, long-term ideas. Blue Origin was, as he was, I think, making some money and realized, yeah, it's going to be a multi-generational, trek goal.
Mhm.
But if we start now, we can build. And so Blue Origin started in 2000. I think
Right.
Musk, SpaceX was close there. I think 2001, 2002, both with a similar long-term vision. Musk going to Mars, which Bezos disagrees with. He basically says the Earth is the best place we have. We need to protect it. But he wants, his whole goal with Blue Origin is to create the infrastructure so that in a future generation, somebody could start a space company in a dorm room. Because what he said was, we could start Amazon. I could start Amazon because we already had FedEx, UPS, and United States Postal Service. We already had credit cards. We already had the internet.
Right.
Amazon didn't have to build that infrastructure. We could build on top of it.
Right.
And that's his goal for Blue Origin and going to space. But, I think that's really, absolutely, he wanted to do that. Great. And that's just another step on the way to the ultimate goal of bringing the cost down to the point where you can have startup companies now figuring out how do we maximize space. And I think Musk and Bezos actually are more in line than what seems the press would like. They want to fight, so I'm not sure for Bezos. I don't think it's a competition as much as some of the press would like to build up.
Right.
I'll say it that way.
Actually, I want to ask you something real quick. It's unrelated. Have you ever? So you're near Nashville. Have you ever heard about the George Strait and Jeff Bezos are related?
No, I didn't.
I read that, and I've never heard anything about it since. But I think because his mom's last name is Strait,
right?
I believe, and so I think they're like cousins. Which no one ever talks about that. That's
I was going to say I have not
connection.
heard that.
Yeah,
and obviously for the last few years I spent a lot of time researching, but I will see if I can find out anything. I'll let you know.
Let me know. With regards to going back to sort of Amazon, so what is so obviously he's a master of long-term thinking. How does he sort of balance that with the hyper focus on achieving scale and supremacy in his field and bringing that every single day? And maybe you can sort of tie that into the day one thinking that he has, which you mentioned.
Yeah, so my principle 14 is believe it's always day one. Bezos, again, from the very beginning, every single shareholder letter he's written, the last paragraph or sentence has something to the effect of, we've had lots of problems, but it's going. In fact, I'm looking right now at the 97 letter, or excuse me, the 2015 letter. Here's the sentence. As always, I attach a copy of our original 97 letter, which he has to every single one, which is a whole nother interesting thing. Our approach remains the same, and it's still day one. So what is day one? Well, for me, it's a mindset. It's the idea that literally Bezos thinks still today that Amazon's a startup, which is sort of hard to kind of think about.
Right.
Because you think about startups as new, not 20 some years old and a $1.5 trillion market cap, et cetera, et cetera. But it's that thinking that every day employees walk into Amazon thinking like a startup, thinking of that excitement, thinking of taking care of customers, and he was asked, I'm quoting out of the 2016 letter from an employee all hands meeting, he was asked a question. Jeff, what does day two look like? Right? He's always talking about day one. And actually there's a YouTube video of his answer to that. What he wrote in the letter was, this is a question I've thought a lot about. And his answer is, and I'm quoting, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating painful decline, followed by death.
Mhm.
And that's why it's always day one.
Mhm.
And if you think about companies that have been successful and are no longer here, Kodak, BlackBerry, Blockbuster, Sears, Kmart, pick, I mean,
Right.
whatever ones you want to pick.
Yeah.
It was this idea that they, again, I said earlier, their success made them complacent.
Right. Rest on the laurels. Right.
Yep. Rest on your laurels. We can't change it because it's been successful. And lots of examples in those companies of opportunities missed.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is he goes on to say, what I'm more interested in is day one defense, meaning how do we protect that day one mindset and not shift into a day two mindset?
Mhm.
And he has, 4 items. And let's see if I probably can quote them out of my head.
Mhm.
So number 1 is customer obsession.
Mhm.
Number 2 is a skeptical view of proxies. And for Bezos, a proxy is a process or a procedure that's blindly followed
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not in service of the customer. How
That's a
many
great
times
rule.
have you called up
Mhm.
customer service or contacted? That's
Right.
not our policy.
Right.
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 So
Right.
sometimes you need them. He's not arguing that you shouldn't have them. And there needs to be skepticism about if those still serve the customers well.
That's
So that
the
was
key,
number
right?
2.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right. And then this one I think is really key, an eager adoption of external trends. So looking out, future focused, what's coming
Mhm.
that we need to pay attention to. And he actually identifies in the letter, machine learning as
Mhm.
one of those future trends. And at other places, he talks about we may not have the skills right now to take advantage of that trend, but that probably means we need to develop those skills internally. And AWS is an example of that.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
there
Right.
are, again,
course.
several examples. And then the fourth one is high velocity decision making.
Mhm.
Now, for Bezos, again, another tool for how do you move fast enough. He says there are 2 types of decisions. Type 1 are big, bet the company. You do it slowly, as much information as you can get, and then make a decision
Mhm.
because they're hard to reverse. But he said most decisions at most companies are not type 1. They're type 2. You make a decision with at most 70% of the information you wish you had. And if you make the wrong decision, you quickly pivot, change, make another decision, go back, start over. He said most decisions at a company are type 2. What happens as a company grows is they tend to shift those type 2 decisions to a type 1 process.
Right. Right.
Multiple layers of approval, right? And it slows down growth. When you slow down growth, you slow down opportunities.
He was also the one who said that the err on the side of action was.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of their leadership principles is default to action.
Mhm.
You're better off taking a step. And that really ties into this decision-making, high velocity decisions. You decide, move forward, change if you need to, and keep going.
All right. So it's very much a embracing of experimentation.
Yes. In fact, I believe, people say Amazon's an innovative company.
Mhm.
I sort of don't agree with that, actually. Amazon's an inventive company,
Mm.
and they're an invention factory,
Right. Right.
meaning, right, how many new businesses have they invented or grown when most companies do one thing well?
Mhm.
Amazon does
Mhm.
multiple
Right.
things
Right. Right.
well, right? And I think part of that is because they're always looking for ways, and again, I said this earlier, to invent on behalf of the customer. Kindle's a great, easy example.
Mhm.
Kindle was released in 2007. It took them 3 years to develop it. They started with, quote, his words, the audacious goal of replacing something that's had the same basic form for 500 years, a book. And they did things, the Kindle was not the first e-reader, but they did things that were so different and customer focused. They did e-ink so you could read it anywhere. They did, you did not have to tether the device to a computer because it had cellular built into it. And the goal was to be able to purchase any book available in the world and have it on that device in 60 seconds or less. And they did. And that's why they changed how people consume books.
Right. Yeah. And obviously AWS, which is, I don't know if you have an opinion about this. I think at some point they're going to either have to spin it off by regulators, or maybe they'll spin it off themselves. I mean, that in itself can be, a top 10 company at some point, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. They control a significant portion of the internet's infrastructure with that.
Right. Correct. It'll be, there's certainly lots of talk, and obviously with the current administration, lots of antitrust and all of those kinds of discussions going on now.
The FTC chair, by the way, she came to prominence based on the Amazon antitrust article.
Oh, no question. Yeah. And so that'll be interesting to see what impact that has. I am skeptical that it actually can be broken apart, but I don't know. I mean, I think they're so intertwined together because AWS started as a Amazon service. So Bezos, I can't remember the year right now, but early 2000s, Bezos said, to everybody at Amazon, the only way you'll be able to continue to develop is APIs. Now, he didn't call it that because that wasn't the name at the time, but direct connections, APIs. So everything that Amazon runs on, from website to catalog to logistics to everything, is tied directly into AWS as their, infrastructure to put in place. So no question, there'll be a lot. I non-attorney, not an expert in any stretch of the imagination. In order for the my opinion is, in order for the antitrust to go through or be decided, it'll take a change in the law because the current basis is based on customer harm. Right. The customers, harmed by it. Now, again, she made some interesting, I read her paper. She made some interesting arguments that harm can happen in a different way than just financial
reinterpretation, right?
Yep. Reinterpretation of what that might mean. And that may fly.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. I suspect it probably will, but it won't be Amazon first. I think Google's probably the most clear cut.
Well, I feel like Facebook and Google
and then Facebook, and then probably Amazon third. Yeah.
Could be. Yep.
Yeah. With respect to their size is absolutely massive now, and the day one thing. How did they go about having a flexibility? So giant corporations, they're synonymous for just being very slow and bureaucratic and overburdensome. That's why they do eventually fall into stasis and die. How can a giant corporation buck that trend and still be flexible and actually, there's another thing I want to ask you about in addition to that is, speaking of innovation, is the I don't know if you have an opinion on this bit. So they haven't really embraced cryptocurrency yet, which seems like it kind of would have been a segue to a certain extent, especially with their marketplace, and some of the other tech companies, obviously like PayPal and Visa have embraced more of it. Why do you think that is? And does it fall into what you said, that they want to be inventive and not innovative? Or do you see them positioning themselves in that market?
Okay, so let me address that one first, and then we can come back to your other question. So there are a couple of things, and I'm going to make a corollary here to a comment he made in the, I think 2000 and I don't remember, 8, 9, 10 letter.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 6, actually, 2006. He addressed this comment, question he gets, Jeff, when are you going to open physical stores? And he said, I get this question a lot. And opening a physical retail location doesn't meet our criteria for where we should spend capital. And part of it is it's a old and cagey ancient business.
Right.
And the phrase I want to focus on, he says, we haven't figured out how to have meaningful differentiation in retail. And I think he talks about it with physical stores. And by the way, they did start opening up physical stores. And now they're opening more and more, even latest, we'll see if it's true or not, opening up, small department stores for that physical presence. But part of what they did meaningfully differentiated is the just walk out technology, meaning there are no checkouts. There are cameras and sensors watching what you put in your cart and then charging you for that. I've done it myself. It's absolutely astounding.
Right.
So the question, that's where I'm going to tie it into crypto. The question is, and there have been some rumors about them starting a group, and I think, again, testing, but I think the idea is going to be, how do we have meaningful differentiation from just a Me Too product? They don't like to do Me Too products, meaning they, as he says, we pay attention to competitors, but we don't focus on competitors because we want to do something different. So and I'm speculating at this point, but that would be my take on why not this, or pick any other type of industry that you might think they should go into. And now I don't remember your first question.
The other question was, the other question was in regards to their size.
How do they size? How do they keep nimbleness?
Right.
So another tool, kind of like the 6-page memo, is what's commonly known as a 2-pizza team, meaning teams at Amazon are only as big as can be fed by 2 pizzas. So the idea here is you keep teams small, so you keep communication granular. And at one point, there's a story that people were having trouble keeping up on different teams and what they were doing. And so a group came in with this great idea to Bezos that we're going to create a collaboration platform. And he like slammed his hand on the table and he said, we don't need a collaboration platform. We need smaller teams so that communication is natural, which is, again, counterintuitive.
Right.
What's missing with just the 2-pizza team, though, is the concept of a single threaded leader. And I think that's the key, meaning that team has one leader who is tasked with whatever the deliverable for that team. Now, understand, if it's a big project, there could be 200 teams.
Right.
But then there are 200 leaders taking care of this piece of the project. And so they're not communicating with every team about where we are. They're making high velocity decisions. They're living with their decisions or changing them. And then they're kind of plugging them into the overall project. And there's a single threaded leader going up only a couple steps, though, not multiple steps. I think that's the key to what you said, is that tendency to get very bureaucratic.
Right.
And it places an amazing amount of trust in employees.
No, it's brilliant. I mean, it's a almost like a federalism approach, decentralized approach to a certain extent. Yeah, I wish our government ran that way.
Oh yeah.
What else are the there's one other question I want to ask you about, slightly unrelated. What else are the sort of counterintuitive implementations that Amazon and Bezos have done that have contributed to their success, in your opinion?
So again, my 14 principles are broken down into 4 cycles: test, build, accelerate, and scale. In the second cycle build, there's a principle I call understand your flywheel. And that was key from 2001 on. So quick background. Flywheel concept comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Published actually in October of 2001. Chapter 8 is all about the flywheel and the doom loop. In August of 2001, Bezos invited Collins to come to a senior leadership team meeting offsite. And they spent the whole day just talking about the flywheel. And they literally sketched out, the team did, what Amazon's flywheel was. And Bezos thought that was so important to Amazon that he actually didn't want anybody to talk about the flywheel for a number of years. But the flywheel, the center part for Amazon is growth. And then what are the inputs? So the concept of the flywheel, right? Big, heavy, hard to get going, but once you get it going, it's easier to keep it going.
Right.
So for Amazon, the key was customers coming to their website. So one of the inputs was getting more customers to the website. If they got more customers to the website, they could have more negotiating power with manufacturers to lower the prices. Lower prices would generate word of mouth for current customers. Hey, you ought to check out Amazon, which would bring more customers in. So it became this, they called it actually the virtuous cycle. And then they added in the early 2000s, third-party sellers. Counterintuitive. I mean, think about it. How many companies do you know, even today, that allow third-party independent sellers to sell on a e-commerce site? Walmart just started doing it.
Right.
Target doesn't do it, right? I mean, it's so counterintuitive, but what they realized is if we have wider selection from third-party sellers, that'll bring more customers in to feed our flywheel. And that'll give us more negotiating power with manufacturers because we got now bigger traffic, and it just keeps that flywheel moving. So I think that's key. And even if you look at acquisitions, Whole Foods or, PillPack or any of those, it's this whole idea of continuing to feed that flywheel to keep that growth momentum going.
That makes sense. One last thing I want to ask you, which is more Bezos related than Amazon related, and sort of gets to who he is. Assuming it's not purely altruistic, 100% altruistic, why do you think someone like him would buy the Washington Post based on what you've read about and analyzed about his mentality and the way he makes decisions? What do you think it is?
I actually think it's a couple things. I do think altruism is part of it. Two, Graham, he was pretty good friends with Graham, and evidently Graham, I forgot the guy's first name.
Was that the
he was the owner
right.
of Phil Graham, maybe. I can't remember that. Evidently he made a really good reason why. And again, this is sort of tied into the altruism, but what Bezos has said is, we need to have those independent voices. And I do believe from what I hear out of Washington Post and other sources that he is pretty hands-on, except for the technology. So he has come in and helped, as I guess to me obvious, but has helped Washington Post with its technology, from the newsroom to printing to other things, and has turned that into a small side business for Washington Post, making that available to other newspaper firms. Now, certainly over the last few years, that all of that's been called into question, and all the political conversation around him directing it, et cetera. Right now, I haven't seen enough evidence to even make me think that that's happening.
Oh, yeah, that's it. It's a, one of the sort of hallmarks, I think, in American history were the most powerful people in the world wanting to control their image.
Yes.
And having influence in the media as well. So it's not a surprise.
Well, and
you know.
again, even with that, I would say, I mean, there are a number of articles on the Washington Post critical of Amazon, right? So it's not like, I mean, those to me are indicators that
Mhm.
there isn't a filter there to only say good things about Amazon.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think I've seen one or two. I don't track the post as much anymore. I used to.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's definitely very interesting. Well, anyways, your book is fascinating. It's called The Bezos Letters, and I will put a link to it in our bio so other people can see. Is there anywhere else people can find you?
Well, there's more information on the book website, which is thebezosletters.com. And if you do get the book, there's an additional workbook to help you work through the principles and see how they run their own business.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Steve Anderson, thank you so much for joining me.
Ashton, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks for listening, and we will be back next week.
We're going to talk about the issues that really matter. Our country, our economy, the Fed, QE, GDP, BTC, NFTs, AOC, the CCP, Cardi B, Yeezy, Yellow Socks, Iran, Joe Biden's dementia, come on, man, and probably sex robots. We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas. And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler. What? Let's get started.